Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining our webinar today. Get the facts and know you are prepared with the CAEL English Language Test. I'm Kareem Al-Assal, the Policy Director at CanadaVisa. Canada is one of the most popular destinations in the world for global talent. Today, Canada is home to over 800,000 international students. When you're looking to study in Canada, the college or university you're applying to may require that you complete an English language test. In addition, if you want to apply for a study permit under Canada's Fast Track Student Direct Stream program, you are required to submit the results of your English language test to the Canadian government. As such, we're hosting today's webinar to help you understand how you can succeed on the CAEL English language test. CAEL was developed by language test experts in Canada and is accepted by over 180 academic institutions across Canada. On August 10, just a few weeks ago, the Canadian government also began to accept CAEL under the Student Direct Stream, in which Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, IRCC, looks to process most study permit applications within just 20 calendar days. Over the next 25 minutes or so, we're going to hear from two expert speakers who will help you understand the benefits of taking CAEL, how you can sign up, and how you can prepare for the test. In essence, the purpose of this webinar is to help you get the best score possible on the CAEL so that you can use the results to achieve your goal of studying in Canada and hopefully settling here. Following the presentation, we're going to hold a question and answer session. You're very welcome to submit your questions in the chat box on your screens. We're happy to answer general questions about CAEL. For specific questions about your own personal situation, we're going to invite you to contact CAEL after the webinar, and we'll share those details with you very shortly. I'm also happy to note this webinar is being recorded. We're going to email you a recording of the webinar by tomorrow. Now, let me go ahead and introduce our two expert speakers. Ivan Petrov is the Manager of Academic Relations at Prometric. Prometric is the company that offers CAEL. Ivan joined Prometric in 2022 to support the assessment mandates of academic institutions, government, and strategic stakeholders, focusing on Prometric's English language and prior learning assessments. In his current role, Ivan is responsible for growing the adoption of the CAEL and DSST programs in Canada, the US, and beyond. He's a graduate of the University of Toronto's Munk School of Global Affairs, where he conducted interdisciplinary research specializing on issues of culture, diversity, citizenship, diaspora studies, migration, and with a focus on the Balkans, Baltics, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Welcome, Ivan.
It is wonderful to be here. Thank you, Kareem, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Ivan. Our second expert speaker is Michael Holliday, who is the Vice President of Business Development at Prometric. Michael has spent his career in education with over 20 years of experience, working in over 40 countries on 5 continents in graduate management education, business development, and educational technology. In his current role as VP at Prometric, he is responsible for driving worldwide expansion of Prometric's own content, including the CAEL, CELPIP, and DSST products. He holds a Bachelor of Education degree from the University of Saskatchewan and an MBA from the University of British Columbia. Michael, the floor is now yours.
Great. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for having us. As has been stated, we're really grateful to all of you who are taking the time out to join us. And so we're going to make this very valuable and tell you more about the Canadian Academic English Language Test. So that is what the CAEL stands for. And in the next little bit, we're going to go through the following agenda here. We're going to give you a brief overview of what this English language test is, how it's structured, and why you would want to choose to write it as you pursue your educational goals in Canada or elsewhere. We're going to go over the overview of the language used in university. And then we're going to talk about why language integration is so important. So when we say language integration, we mean speaking, reading, listening, and writing. You're typically not using those in the university context, each one on its own. You're often using them together. So we want to talk about why that's important and how our test does that. And then we're going to talk about how to prepare. So if you're thinking of sitting the CAEL test, where is it that you're going to do this? Now, I saw a question in the chat, and I'll just address this right off, is that there are two versions of the CAEL. There is a CAEL Online test, which is available, and then there's a CAEL at a test center. And as Kareem mentioned, the test center version is the one that is available for SDS, for the Student Direct Stream, as of August 10th. Canadian government does not yet accept online tests. Okay, so with that, we're going to launch into first an introduction to the test, where it's available. So this is where we currently have the CAEL test available now, but I would like to note that we continue to expand and open in more countries as much as we can. So I note that this is a very diverse crowd, and that some of you are in countries where it's not yet available, but we're coming soon to as many places as we can. And we really hope to bring this test as broad and wide as people would like it to be. So more on that later, but suffice it to say that we're already available in a number of different countries around the world, and that's going to continue to expand. Now, when you sit English language tests, and some of you may have done some research about other products as you've been looking at it, there are a few different kinds of characteristics. And one of the things we love to highlight about our test is that it is completely computer delivered. So we don't do a pencil and paper test. We do it 100% on computer. And this also includes the speaking portion. So when you do the speaking portion of our test, you speak directly into a microphone, and it is captured then and there in the same sitting, and you don't speak to a person, or you don't have to worry about that. So we're really interested in speaking. We turn your results around quickly, and we provide quite a bit of free study materials. As was mentioned at the beginning by Kareem, we are accepted all across Canada. So if you're planning to study in Canada, you don't have to worry about whether or not a university will accept your CAEL score for application. The things I'll highlight here as well, beyond the sort of one sitting and the speaking, are just some things that make the test more convenient to sit. So the reading, the text and questions are on the same screen, so you have a very nice layout for your testing experience. There are word counter and editing tools, so you can keep an eye and focus more on your language, which is what we're interested in, not get so caught up on whether or not you're writing too much or too little. Volume control, so you can adjust what you're hearing through the microphones for the listening portions and for other times when you need to listen. And then time management. This is one of the things that test takers always struggle with, myself included. When I was a student, writing a test and knowing that you have only 2 or 3 hours to complete it, and knowing that you have to get everything done as well as you can within a finite amount of time. We highlight that it is Canadian English. I don't think that that is something to either worry about or give too much thought to, only that if you're planning to come and study in Canada, which is a very diverse country, we use the kind of English usage that is most commonly used in Canada, right? So it's a really good match. Now, it's not terribly different from other versions of English around the world. But for example, we say trucks instead of lorries in some parts of the world. We say elevators instead of lifts. So it's minor, but it's important to have that language usage and be used to the way that a lot of the folks you'll encounter in university are speaking. This is a system that I want to highlight. So in terms of reporting your scores, we'll send them to the universities, and the universities can access their scores through a secure system that is online, that is very easy for them to do that. So we take care of all that for you. You don't have to send your own scores. You just choose where you want them sent, and the universities access it through this system. The score reports can be sent to other institutions. If you want to apply to more than 5 institutions, you can order additional CAEL score reports to be sent. And then you will be able to get access to your scores 8 business days after you've written your test, so you can see how you did as well. Scholarships. I used to work at the University of British Columbia, and one of the great pleasures that I had there was being able to give scholarships to students to come and join us and study with us. And so we want to do that with CAEL, and we do this every year. We give out some scholarships in varying amounts. There's a minimum score you have to get on the CAEL to do that. And by the way, you can go to each university's website and find out what their minimum score is to apply using the CAEL. But we encourage you to learn more at the link and go check out ways that that we want to give back to our students that are achieving well on the CAEL and headed to university. Okay, I'm very shortly going to hand it back over to my colleague, Ivan. But first of all, I just wanted to highlight, as we've mentioned, that the student direct stream now accepts the CAEL and our other test, which is the CELPIP. We're not going to focus on the CELPIP test here today. That's commonly used for permanent residency. So if you're planning to come to Canada, not as a student, you may be considering the CELPIP to write as a test used to become a permanent resident. However, it's also accepted for STS. Today, we're focused on the CAEL, which was accepted as of August 10th. So that's something for those of you that are in STS countries, is a major benefit for you. When we have time, or when you have time, I'd encourage you to go check out the CAEL descriptors. This is what the CAEL bands are, and what, again, as you go look at the university websites, you will be able to see what their minimum scores require and match them up to this level of English. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, who is going to walk you through, why do universities have language requirements? What kind of English do we speak at universities? And then he's going to talk about why it's so important that the CAEL test is an integrated test.
Many thanks, Michael. Many thanks, Kareem, once again. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. As Michael mentioned in the previous slide, talking about the various bands and the use of academic English at Canadian universities, we want to reiterate why Canadian universities and colleges have a language requirement. There are several reasons for this. First, students need to be able to comprehend and engage with content to be successful. Now, this point is equal parts self-evident and yet incredibly crucial. The last thing universities and colleges want is for learners to miss essential opportunities to interact with the university community, make academic connections and social connections, and to be able to become participating members, all of which have implications for their overall well-being, academic success, and finally, employment prospects. Which brings us to student retention. Universities want their students to succeed. And again, it's self-evident, but I want to stress that that's a very important facet of why institutions want to have and retain that language requirement. Language proficiency is simply essential to that success. Anecdotally, undergraduates' dropout percentages are usually highest in the first year. Universities are also concerned about time to degree completion. Some students may take longer, maybe 5 or 6 years, but if it takes them 9 years or more, that's not in the university's best interest, nor it is in the learner's best interest and their families as well. Finally, Canada has very strict academic requirements in terms of the quality of existing legislation and academic standards. It is very important for these universities that when folks graduate from the respective college or university, they become representatives of that respective brand. And most importantly, at the end of that journey, where a lot of universities are also being assessed, is the ability for these candidates to get meaningful employment, because there's also a great pool of companies that are vying for talent in Canada as well. Now, let's consider the modern university classroom. In other words, what Michael was alluding to a moment ago, what does language use look like in the classroom? In years past, most learning was supposed to happen while the professor lectured. This lecture-style learning was standard for decades, and to be sure, we still see it in many university classrooms. For learners, this typically involved listening to a lecture, viewing slides, and in-class reading. But what of the so-called flipped classroom that is emerging or has emerged in the Canadian and international educational landscape? Nowadays, this learning experience is more dynamic, and much more of the reading and learning happens before students show up to class. Courses often involve collaborative style activities such as making presentations, discussing with peers, working on group projects. Standard lecture style teaching still happens, of course, but even those professors who prefer lecturing will at some point ask their students to discuss what was said. If nothing else, students will form their study groups outside of class as well. So the way we approach our role when thinking about what a language test should be like, what it should assess, and how it benefits the academic institution and the test taker. We want to capture all of these activities I just mentioned as the kinds of things students need to demonstrate that they can do as part of their application process, but also, crucially, give test takers a really clear preview of what they might expect when they get to class on day one. Michael alluded earlier to the fact that the CAEL test is well positioned to give you an idea of what the Canadian accent really is, without necessarily distinguishing it from others. But here with CAEL, we're also diving into the ability of the test taker, of you, to understand what your first year of your first year academic career is going to look like when you get to campus in Canada. In other words, let's look at under the hood of what language testing and the CAEL test in particular should look like. What purpose does it serve? How does it benefit you, and how does it benefit the academic institution? To answer these questions, we need to understand what skills students in post-secondary classrooms need to foster vis-a-vis their language ability. What kinds of language do people use in university classrooms that they don't necessarily use out in the community in their everyday interactions? Broadly speaking, without spending too much time into this, this language falls into a few specific categories: formal language, technical, subject-specific. And again, the purpose of CAEL is twofold: to ensure the highest possible level of preparedness for the first year university instruction, and give test takers an indication of what their academic language use will be like at a Canadian college or university. In other words, it prepares learners to take a test that indicates their likelihood for success throughout their academic career and into the workforce. I'll briefly outline the various academic and supporting activities that will be crucial to keep in mind as we go into the levels of integration and types of assessment and integrations that the CAEL utilizes. So just keep this in mind as we proceed through the following slides. Just a few things that come to mind when we think of academic English. Core academic activities are the ones that come to mind when we think of academic language: listening to lectures, reading textbooks, writing essays, and explaining something to a professor or a classmate. Supporting academic activities, on the other hand, are the softer things we do on campus, like speaking informally with a teacher about our academic goals, listening to a teacher explain how to do labs, reading instructions for an assignment, going to a library presentation, and so on. And then there are social activities, the informal things we do, like chatting with friends in the cafeteria, going to the health center, highly recommended. Getting on the bus, also highly recommended if it also gets you to get your 10,000 daily step count. Joining the chess club, etc. All these activities support academic success to different degrees. So what CAEL does is it offers to assess many core academic activities and a few supporting ones together. We can call these central for the success of the academic experience of candidates. And again, in the following slides, we'll see how we go about integrating all of them. As we'll see shortly, in the CAEL test, test takers may read a passage and then answer a question about it verbally, or they may be asked to listen to a lecture, read a passage on the same topic, and produce a short writing passage using information from both sources. In other words, integration, mimicking the experience of that first year academic instruction. One last thing to note, vis-a-vis integration, specifically when it comes to the topics that are used to assess your academic language proficiency. We often get asked about where the reading, listening, writing, and speaking topics come from on CAEL, and how many topics is reasonable to expect on this type of test. Again, the obvious answer here is that test takers are being assessed for entry into first-year post-secondary studies, so including topics typically covered in a first-year university classroom is the thing that makes the most sense. And guess what? An integrated test like CAEL allows for using academic topics selected from first-year arts and science courses, but no background knowledge about these topics is necessary. In other words, again, it replicates the experience of acquiring, summarizing, and reporting newly acquired knowledge on campus. Which brings us to the nuts and bolts, the actual format of the test. This is how CAEL goes about integrated skill assessments. It has 5 parts. Part 1, as you can see, is different from the others because there are only speaking tasks. You can see that parts 2 and 3 integrate 2 skills, and parts 4 and 5 integrate 3 skills. Let's start with the different speaking tasks. There are essentially 2 types: independent speaking and integrated speaking. The difference here is that the independent speaking tasks are not based on a listening or reading passage. For the independent speaking tasks, learners will talk about themselves or a visual, like a diagram or a chart. Important to note here is the fact that there are 2 specially trained raters that assess both independently, evaluating each speaking task. A third rater may be brought in if they disagree on a score, but the important thing to note also here is that you are not speaking directly to the rater. The speech portion of the exam gets to the rater at a later date. In other words, you don't have to worry about basically looking at someone's body language and perhaps getting worried or apprehensive about how they may be perceiving the way you're talking on the test. Next, when assessing integrated speaking on a long reading passage, learners can see the reading passage tab on to access the passage throughout their prep and speaking time. It is important to know that they would have already read this material earlier in the test and answered comprehension questions about it. This will be the second time they see this reading passage. Again, another indication of the fact that this replicates the experience of a first-year academic instruction on campus. There are a couple of other examples that I wanted to share before we move on to how we prepare you folks for taking the test. One that I think is very important is reading, and there are 2 types of reading tasks, short and long. The short reading task will deal with something like a class handout, details of an assignment or lab instructions, whereas the long reading will be based on an excerpt from a textbook, journal, or other academic source. Test takers will have about 5.5 minutes for the short reading and about 20 minutes for the long reading. And finally, like the reading tasks, there are 2 types of listening tasks. The short listening tasks are based on things like an instructor's explanation of an assignment, or the introduction to a new class. The long listening task will be in the form of a lecture on an academic topic. For each listening tasks, candidates will always have time to preview the questions before the audio starts, and then some time to review answers after the audio is finished. Finally, let's look at the short writing. For this one, the instructions will tell you to use either the lecture or the reading. You can see in this example that the question requires you to use the reading passage, so it's important to pay attention to the instructions. You have 10 minutes to write at least 100 words for this task. You can see that you can access both the reading and the lecture notes, but remember that you're only required to use one. I'll leave you with this. The importance of what we just did very briefly is to suggest to you that it's crucial to have an integrated testing experience that, again, not only suggests to the institution to which you're applying that you are a very qualified candidate, capable of governing yourself really well within first-year academic instruction. But it's also very important to note that this gives you a really clear example of what that first-year instruction is going to look like when you get to a Canadian university. And with that, I'll give it back to Michael to kind of give you an idea of what the types of prep materials we have available to get you there.
Great. Thank you very much, Ivan. Thank you for walking us through the structure of the test. And I would just add, before we get into that, is that, you know, we wanted to give you just a little bit of a sample so you understand what the test looks like. It's hard to, you know, go through the whole thing, and we wouldn't sort of do that to you. We want to give you the highlights. However, if you go to our website, CAEL.ca online, you can take a free sample test. So you can click on it, go through the whole test, see what kinds of questions, see what it looks like, see what the format is. You can do that, you know, anytime you want. So that's probably the best way to dive in and see what the format of the CAEL test is, get a sense of it. And, you know, when we talk about, one of the questions we get is when Ivan was displaying the different subjects, you certainly don't need to have a background in any of those. And as he pointed out, we're looking at, you know, your ability to succeed in a first-year classroom where you're being introduced to perhaps readings and things you haven't encountered before, but we need you to have the ability to interact with those things. So, so give it a go on the sample test. You'll see exactly what we're talking about and get a sense of what the test is like. Now, of course, one of the most important things about an English language test is, can I get the score I need, right? Is my English language ability good enough to succeed? And so there's sort of two ways to prepare for that, right? One is to just continue to learn and improve your English. Read books, watch movies, talk to friends, right? Spend time in the language. And of course, the other way is to prepare for the specifics of the test. So we have a lot of ways to do that. These are just some of them: sample guides, sample tests. We have a number of practice tests that we sell. This is always the most popular thing with test takers, is purchasing and doing practice tests. But somewhat additional things to do that. So we focus on different things. We offer something called Vocabulary Builder. One of the products that I think is really great for students to think about is CAEL Accelerate. It's an online course that you pace it as you go, and you go through and prepare that way. We also offer a whole bunch of free online resources to help you prepare. So we have videos, we do webinars all the time. So such as this one, except we'll go more in depth to the test. And that will be with like our actual, you know, people that prepare the prep materials and know this test inside and out. So that's more in depth. Of course, this is just an overview today, but lots and lots of free things to help you prepare. So I'm going to move to questions and comments in a moment and turn it back to Kareem here. But I just wanted to say, again, thank you for your time. And we hope that we'll be able to answer a lot of questions for you. Again, this was an overview, but there's lots more to learn about it. And we really think the CAEL is an excellent option for you, not only for proving your English language ability, but for getting a sense of what level and what kind of English will be expected of you when you go on to success in your studies.
Thank you so much for that, Michael, for putting everything so succinctly, and thank you, Ivan. So now it's time for the main event. You guys have been very patient, and we want to answer as many of your questions as possible. We'll start off with a few fun ones, Michael and Ivan. So a few people have already asked this question. It's essentially, I already have an excellent command of English. Do I have to take the CAEL to be able to study in Canada?
Great question. The answer, and you'll find this when you get to university, this is often the answer. The answer is, it depends. So if you are, and I see people from a lot of countries here, right, where I know English is the primary language, right? So Nigeria is a great example of that. Many universities in Canada will not require you, if you're from certain countries, to write an English language test, right? They're going to say, look, your English schooling was in English, your primary language is English, you're not going to need an English language test. Some will. It depends on the institution and it depends on the country. So I don't want to issue a sweeping generalization. It depends. Check the admission requirements of the universities that you want to apply to see if your school system and your native country requires an English language test to apply. Now, having said that, if you are in a country where there is student direct stream, you may not need an English language test to apply and get admitted to university, but it may benefit you to take one to be part of the student direct stream. And for that, you can take either CAEL or a CELPIP. So I hope that answers it. But I think the best advice is always check the institution's requirements directly from their web pages. They all lay it out very transparently. And then check mark 2 is, are you going to apply through the student direct stream or not?
Here's another fun question. What's the difference between CAEL and IELTS and TOEFL?
That is a good question. I can lay out a few of them. And of course, we like to highlight what we do and not so much, we know there are other options out there for you. One of the things that we talk about that we really like about the CAEL is this, as Yvonne mentioned, this integrated nature of the test, where you're doing academic units and we are showing you the language that is reflected on a Canadian campus. So that's one of the elements that we think we do very well. Another aspect that was mentioned is that when you sit the speaking test, it's all captured at once into a microphone on test setting day. So there's no need to come back for another speaking appointment, and you never talk to a person. So you don't have to worry about getting nervous if that's something that, we wouldn't want your potential anxiety about having to speak to someone to interfere with us capturing your actual speaking ability. And then, I guess the third difference is, as we talked about, the Canadian English is certainly one of the trademarks of our test.
Thank you for that, Michael. So a number of people have asked this question. I'm going to go ahead and ask it to the two of you, and then I'm going to load up the slides again just so that we can look at the information. The question is, how can I find out if CAEL is available in my country?
Right.
I can actually, while we're doing this, I can share the link immediately with folks. Just give me 1 second, please.
While Ivan's doing that, you can certainly go to the CAEL.ca website and see where we're available. Now, as I mentioned, there are 2 kinds of CAEL. There's the CAEL Online, which is available in a number of countries, and there's CAEL at a test center. In some countries, both are available. In some countries, only one of those is currently available. But we're doing our best to expand and get to as many more countries as rapidly as we can. Ivan, anything you want to add to that in terms of?
Oh, I think you captured it precisely, Michael. However, I'll share the link here in a moment. And I would just encourage folks to come and check this website regularly, because we are doing a lot of the work already in standing up new test centers and availability. So here it is, and let me know if it works for everyone.
Okay. Is there anything you guys want to add to the information on this map, or should we move on?
I think we can probably move on. Just that we're continuing to make that map have more and more dark red patches.
Yeah, we're exactly. Well said. Thank you, Mike.
So we've gotten this question from a number of participants. Can I use the online version of CAEL to support my student direct stream application?
The short answer to that is, unfortunately, the student direct stream only accepts test results from a test center, and I'm not sure if there's ever been the potential for changing that policy. I think it's probably here to stay, if that makes sense. Michael, do you know any more?
I think in the short to medium term, my understanding is it will remain at a test center.
Yeah.
But I will add that if you're not going through the student direct stream, CAEL Online is accepted across Canada as well. So for university admission, it's very commonly accepted.
Excellent. Another question, I know you guys have touched on this, and maybe we can go to the slide. How is CAEL scored?
Do you want to take this one, Ivan, or do you want me to jump in on it?
Yeah, here. So basically, thank you. So the CAEL, basically the bands are self-explanatory with the descriptors. A lot of the institutions, and maybe this is where the question comes from, a lot of the institutions would require a score of 60 plus. But again, I would urge test takers to follow up with the particular institution, particularly if you are applying for graduate study. A lot of institutions may require 70 plus, which is the ability to use generally accurate language in most settings, some limitations in flexibility or evidence, but you are effectively building up the vocabulary to become a really proficient academic speaker. And again, the point here is that we're assessing, and this is what institutions want to see, the ability to perform in the academic setting for however long your academic career may be. It may be slightly different than the overall command of the English language, which kind of ties into one of the earlier questions, but the scoring reflects that academic facility.
Excellent. Can you guys speak more to the scholarship? We have a question here about how one can be eligible for it.
Yeah, I mean, you can directly apply. You can apply directly from your CAEL login account. Effectively, as soon as you create your account on CAEL.ca and submit your scores to an academic institution, you can directly apply on the website itself. The requirements are: one, an enrollment letter from a university or college in Canada. There is a short writing component, which in most cases basically gives you an opportunity to talk about your experience and the reason why you're applying to a certain program. So it's fairly straightforward, and it could be a very exciting component of the application. But just to summarize, it's a short writing assignment that talks about your experience and the reasons why you want to join a certain program, submission of your score to a university or college. I think there's also a requirement for getting 60 plus for in terms of the score, and that's basically it. All of it can be done directly from your CAEL account on CAEL.ca.
Horea asks, can we take the CAEL more than once?
Yes.
And
you know, I let me just, if I may expand on that a little bit, is that some folks have to take an English language test more than once. that happens. But we certainly know that there's cost associated with that. So what we try to do is put out as many prep materials as we can. And what we would encourage you to do to avoid having to take the CAEL more than once is do tons and tons of practice tests, do a lot of prep so that you go in being as well prepared as you can. Of course, you may need to take it more than once, and that's fine. But what we try to do is front load you with preparation options so that if you really do the prep beforehand, ideally you don't have to take it as many times.
I would echo that. And just before we move to another question, what I have found super useful, and with folks that I've spoken with, candidates and test takers, you start with the free resources that are on YouTube, for instance, which Michael outlined. There's 25 hours or more of available resources. And as soon as you get a sense of what that looks like, you can then decide to take a test. It doesn't take long. And once you see the kinds of responses you're getting from your assessment, you can decide where to go and dive deeper into, let's say, the vocabulary building. All of this is a matter of maybe a couple of months of, fairly fun, exciting prep work, but it is definitely worth it.
Mofe asks, can I use CAEL if I want to pursue a master's degree in Canada?
Yes. The short answer is yes. I would, again, check with the accepting institution for the particular score that's required by them. But in most cases, that information is already available on their individual admissions website.
We have a good question here from Horea. If I'm also looking at potentially studying in other countries, is CAEL accepted in countries such as Australia or the UK or the US? Sorry, Michael, we lost
Michael, I think you're muted.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, currently it's very limited. So we didn't get too much into the history, but let me give you a brief history about the CAEL. It started in Canada. It was developed at Carleton University, as Kareem alluded to at the beginning. And so we have focused on Canada initially. And what we found is that there was it resonated a lot with Canadian institutions. Now, we don't plan to stop there. We have, I think, a couple of institutions in the US that accept it. But in the fullness of time, we certainly think it's an excellent test that would be accepted in other countries. But for now, we've really kept the focus on Canada, since that's where we've been created. And we're sort of, I think we see ourselves as part of that recruitment to Canada, at the moment. But in the future, we would certainly like to see the CAEL expand its acceptance.
Riaz asks, how many sittings in a month are typically offered for the CAEL?
That varies by region. So what we try to do is offer as many sittings as there is demand for, and that demand, tends to go up. So we try to keep at least, if we're in a market at all, we want to do at least once a month. But ideally, we'll be doing it multiple times a month. So keep checking our website because we keep adding sittings. Best is to book like a month in advance. If you can, that gives you time to study, or maybe you've already started studying before.
Amar asks, is there a waiting period between the first test and a retake?
We used to have a waiting period, and we've gotten rid of that. You're unlikely to see the same material, and it doesn't really benefit tests. So I would say if you're taking it like 3 times in a row within 2 weeks, you're probably not getting. That's not going to help you do better on the test. You have to go back and improve your English ability. But if you took the test once and you didn't get the score you wanted, and it was a bad day or whatever, then you can certainly take it again. We just didn't. In the past, we limited because we didn't want folks, taking it a bunch in short succession. But really, that choice is yours.
I know we've covered this extensively, but I'll go ahead and ask the question anyway, just to get the point home. Niyagana asks, are there any study materials available for the CAEL test?
There
Yes.
are, yeah. Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
Well, I want to try and put a little bow around this, which is that yes, and what we try to do is make them available for any price point. So if you don't want to spend a lot of money on prep, we make lots of stuff for free. If you would like to then, you think that it's part of your preparation to spend some money on paid materials like practice tests and those things, then we offer that too. So what we want to do is make it as accessible as possible to anyone who wants to take the test in terms of the investment that you put into preparing.
We've gotten this question a number of times. GView is the most recent person to ask it. How much is the test fee?
It's $280 Canadian dollars, and the equivalent in local currency, basically wherever you're taking it.
Yeah, and it will fluctuate based on the market in terms of, we will usually price it more competitively relative to the markets that it's in. So as an example,
yeah,
it costs more than that in absolute dollars in, say, somewhere like the UAE. It costs less than that in absolute dollars in say, India. So it just depends on we try to price to local market.
How long are CAEL test scores valid for? I guess there's two components to this. One is among institutions and the other is among IRCC for the STS.
2 years. So 2 years is the industry standard. There are, I don't think, any test providers that would say that their tests are valid for more than 2 years. IRCC is 2 years, institutions are 2 years. So that tends to be the industry standard. And the reason, just very briefly, for that is that within 2 years, your language ability could change significantly. So if I was fluent in English at one point because I was living in Canada, speaking it every day, and then I moved to a country where I didn't use it very often, I used, say, my native language or some other language I was studying, it's possible that your English language ability would deteriorate over that time.
We have a question here from Michael. How do you get to see your test results when you're done writing the CAEL?
This happens again directly within your CAEL account. They're available, I think, about 8 days after you sit the test, and you'll get a notification directly in your email to go and check your results. It's a PDF format, easy, accessible, but all of it just takes place directly within your CAEL.ca account.
A number of participants have asked, can we use the CAEL to apply for Canadian permanent residence?
No, is the short answer. The additional answer is, but you can use the CELPIP, which we also offer, which is a test of general English. And it is one of the tests accepted for permanent residency applications in Canada. So maybe, Ivan, if we can drop in the CELPIP website as well. We're not focused on that test, so we'll give you the link, and you can go certainly take a look at that test. A lot of the same things apply. There's lots of free study materials. It's all computer delivered. All the speaking is captured and one sitting into a microphone, so there's a lot of commonalities, but it is testing general English language, right, day to day, as opposed to academic English language.
Michael, do you want to elaborate on CELPIP's validity for the student direct stream?
Yes, so CELPIP is also accepted for the student direct stream. So it's nice if you may be in a situation where you don't need to write the CAEL test to get accepted to university because you're from a country where English is the primary language and you already can use that to be accepted. So you get your acceptance from the university. And then rather than taking the CAEL, you can opt to take the CELPIP to use for your student direct stream application.
Amar is in Toronto. He's wondering if CAEL is available here and in other parts of Canada.
It is, yeah, widely available in test centers and also online in Canada.
I know we've covered this a lot, but it seems like Minhal has recently joined us. Is the CAEL available only online or also physically in centers?
Both. and that availability depends on the country. As mentioned, in lots of markets, we'll have both available, CAEL Online and CAEL Test Center. In some markets, we only have one or the other. Again, as we continue to expand, we want to make them all available everywhere.
We have a question here. What are the different sections of the CAEL test? I know, Ivan, you covered this. Maybe we can touch on this again.
Yeah,
maybe
by all
we can
means.
bring up the slide again just so they can get the visual.
Yeah.
Do you want me to load it up?
Great.
Sure. Actually, maybe I can do it on my. Oh, you got it. Thank you.
It's towards the end, right?
Yeah, keep going.
I think this is a really helpful slide that lays it out.
There.
That's the one.
So, briefly, 5 sections: speaking, integrated reading, integrated listening, academic unit A, which is a longer writing section, and academic unit B, which is a slightly shorter writing section. The main thing here to note again is the fact that with the exception of the speaking component, everything is integrated, which is great for another reason, which I don't know if we mentioned, but because you don't have to have specialized knowledge on the topic that you are talking about, let's say, in the integrated reading and responding to that integrated reading, you're learning everything that you need to know about that particular section right then and there. And there are plenty of kind of accommodations that can give you access to the notes, or give you the ability to write a cogent answer when it comes to the writing component. But altogether, 5 sections, roughly 3.5 hours to complete. Yeah, that's effectively it.
Minhal has a follow-up question. Is CAEL available in Pakistan?
Not at the moment, but I will say that the CELPIP is available in Pakistan, and the CAEL should be following fairly soon. So we hope to have more news about that in the coming bit. It's not currently, but we would like to make it available there.
Ahmed asks a great question. Are there different versions of the CAEL like there are for language other language tests, so academic or general?
No, and that's a really good question because we offer, so in essence, we have 2 language tests. The general one is the CELPIP. The academic one is the CAEL. So there are sort of 2 versions in that sense. They have different names because they're quite different tests. So the CELPIP was developed at the University of British Columbia and has a different format and layout. The CAEL was developed at Carleton University, and we bought it off of Carleton University a few years ago. And so, maybe I'm sharing too much here, but I think that one of the questions is like, why would you just call it CELPIP academic and CELPIP general? And what we really felt was that would be misleading because the tests themselves are structured differently. And so if you took the CELPIP general and then later took the CELPIP academic, i.e. the CAEL, you would say, well, this is not really fair to call these tests the same thing. So they're 2 separate tests for 2 very different purposes. And CELPIP general, CAEL is academic.
Here's a fun question. Is it true CAEL is easier than other tests?
My answer to that is, well, Yvonne, you go first, and then I'll share my answer. I think we probably have slightly different perspectives on this.
We might have slightly different perspectives. Yeah. So we definitely hear that both from people who are about to take the test or one of the tests, and from people who have already taken one or the other or 2. And I think generally speaking, a big part of that in my mind is the perception that it is generally speaking easier to take the CAEL when you're not speaking directly to an individual that's assessing your speaking component. So that apprehension that we both kind of touched upon at various parts of the presentation, where you're not worried about how someone else is perceiving your language capacity in real time, but rather speaking to a computer, which then gets assessed by qualified raters who are very well adapted to the vicissitudes of language acquisition in various language levels. I think this is a very important component that many people would consider to be perhaps a determining factor regarding which way they go, CAEL or otherwise.
Yeah, and my take on this generally is that tests that you don't prepare for are hard, and tests that you do prepare for are less hard. So I don't usually talk about easy or hard with CAEL. I don't know. I haven't written the other tests, and I think that if you ask different people, they may have different answers on this. But what I do like to speak to about the CAEL is the relevance, right? So if we take easy, hard get rid of that as a continuum and say, is what you're learning and studying and preparing for relevant to your university experience? And I would say the CAEL is a very relevant test, and that the content of the CAEL matches what you're going to face in university. And so to make that test easier for you, make sure that you prepare very well for it.
I know we've covered this a couple of times, but it seems like some people haven't heard it. Shudir asks, will I get my test results the same day?
8 days. Yeah, and because we have raters that need to have time to do it, so it's not automatically scored. We have a number of raters that work on different sections, and so it takes some time to do that.
And again, the results are available directly to you as soon as you register on the CAEL website. All of that happens there, and you can access and get an email notification as soon as they're available.
Excellent. Let's take one more question before we wrap up. Here's a good one. I know, Michael, you've already touched on this, but let's address it nonetheless. How much in advance should one study before taking the CAEL?
I think that's a great question that only test takers can answer for themselves. In general, starting earlier is usually better. So 3 to 6 months would not be, unheard of amount of time to study for. At the same time, it depends on your confidence in your English language ability. You may find that a month is enough preparation. So it really depends on the test taker, but I would say there's no harm in starting earlier rather than later.
If I can piggyback on this, my answer is going to kind of revolve around something that we've been talking about throughout the session, and that is, if the task at hand for a test taker and potential candidate is to get a head start on first-year academic instruction in Canada specifically, I would want to get ahead of that as soon as I possibly can. I would think of it as a way of a bridging program almost into easing myself into first-year academic instruction. So therefore, I'll start looking and checking things out at my own pace. And again, this is where the prep comes into its own. I'll get the lay of the land, see what's available, and see what my facility is to determine where I need to go. But as someone whose first language isn't English, I can tell you I would definitely avail myself of that strategy to give myself the best chance of having a great academic experience and then employment opportunities in the future.
Thank you for that, Ivan. We've touched on this already, but let's go ahead and address it nonetheless, because again, it is a very important question. How much does a CAEL cost, and how does the cost compare to other English language tests that are available?
So it varies by country. As Ivan stated earlier, it's $280 in Canada, in Canadian dollars, and then that amount goes up or down to match what the market is in other countries. We tend to price a little bit lower than some of our competitors. And so you'll be able to go find that online and take a look. All our prices for all the countries that we operate in are listed there.
Excellent. So thank you once again, everyone, for participating. And thank you, Michael and Ivan, for taking time out of your busy schedule to support our participants in terms of achieving their goals to study and live in Canada. That brings us to the end of today's webinar. I'd like to thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate. As noted, this webinar was recorded, and we're going to email you by tomorrow with a link to the recording as well as the PowerPoint slides so that you can access all the very helpful CAEL resources that have been shared with you. Again, you're also very welcome to contact CAEL. Their website is cael.ca, and you can also email them at info@cael.ca. Before we wrap up, I'd like to invite Ivan and Michael to provide us with their final remarks.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Ivan. Take it away.
Just very briefly, apart from the fact that I'm super grateful for the opportunity to connect with such a diverse crowd, for me, this is very dear to my heart. So every opportunity to do that, I revel in it. So many thanks to Kareem and his team for this. I will reiterate in parting that the CAEL is a really good way of starting to think about not just language facility itself, but really a great academic career and future employment possibilities in Canada. It does really give you that comprehensive outlook on what your experience would be like. And therefore, the sooner you start preparing, the better. I hope we've kind of given you a sense of the comprehensiveness and the ability to avail yourself of all of the materials. But once again, very grateful. Many thanks to all of you. Many thanks, Kareem. Michael, please.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just to say that, we're again grateful to you for your time, and we're very proud of this test, that it is a made in Canada offering that we think does an excellent job of signaling to you what kind of language ability you'll need in Canada. And we're very proud of the resources that we offer to help you. And really, it's a pleasure of ours to be a part of so many people's journeys to study, live, or work in Canada. So yeah, if you have any questions, please be in touch. And we hope you have a great evening or day, depending on where you're based.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.